from the interviews, it sounds like this is not the first time this has happened. They had to use their blankets to mop up the sewage water from the floors because they were not being provided any cleaning supplies by the prison administration.
We're going to be talking to Eddie Burkhalter and Matthew Vernon Whalen about the state of prisons in Alabama. It's going to be a really good conversation. Hopefully, you will learn a lot. There's a lot to learn about the state of Alabama's prisons, and almost none of it good. And you know, it's something that's so easy for us to just, you know, literally out of sight, out of mind, right? I mean, we don't. A lot of times they're in really rural areas, and you just literally do not see the conditions that the state of Alabama cages human beings in. And, you know, that's something that I think is important, and I think that we need to reckon with, particularly, you know, because of the fact that by and large, the people that end up in these prisons are not the rich. They're not the owners of businesses. They're, you know, they are people who a lot of times caught a bad break, went the wrong direction, and grew up in working class families. And so, you know, these are the people that end up in the prisons. And so it's, you know, I think it's a relevant thing for a union radio program to talk about. We have on the line Eddie Burkhalter, researcher for the Alabama Appleseed Center for Law and Justice, and Matthew Vernon Whalen, journalist and author of the new book, Bullock, Chronicles of Deprivation and Despair in an American prison. Eddie, Matthew, welcome to the Valley Labor Report.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, guys.
Really appreciate it. Eddie, you've been on the program before, and just as a point of personal privilege, I figured I would ask you, are you related to former Alabama AFL-CIO President Stuart Burkhalter?
I am not. I can't claim that part of my family. No, sorry.
Okay. I was just wondering. I had thought about it the other day, and I was like, oh, well, next time I see him, I'm going to have to ask him about that. So, okay, not related, but appreciate your time and coming on the show. You know, Matthew, you live in Vermont, actually, in New England, and so I'm curious, what made you interested in Alabama prisons specifically? What made you want to write about our prison system?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, sort of a long story, I guess. I sort of stumbled into this work. But when I was younger, and I guess my teenage years, I became interested in a death penalty case in Alabama of a guy named Jimmy Davis Jr. I had a family member who worked pro bono on the case, and I had read through his case file and written about it. And I continued to write about Alabama prisons and made connections to other inmates. In about 2019, in early 2019, I had started work on an oral history project about prisons in Alabama, with prisoners, their families, and others, just about how mass incarceration affects people in Alabama. And that was when the pandemic broke out. And so the stories sort of felt a lot more urgent. So instead of doing oral histories on that topic, I sort of switched to just writing investigative news articles about what was unfolding in the prisons during the pandemic. And I just have stayed in touch with people and continued reporting on them over the years. So I've reported on well over half, I think, of the Alabama men's prisons.
Can you give us an overview of, you know, what is the, if somebody were to take away one thing from this interview about what it is like living in a prison in Alabama, what would you want people to take away about the conditions in the prisons?
Yeah, so I think probably the biggest, you know, and Eddie can, you know, point out if there are others as well, but I think the biggest, most central problem with the conditions of the prisons, which a lot of the other problems sort of revolve around and stem from, is overcrowding. So they're open bay dormitories for the most part. They're extremely overcrowded. The buildings are incredibly dilapidated, even though a fair number of them are not particularly old. So a common assumption, even among prisoners I interview, is like these buildings are just so old. They need new ones. They need to be shut down. But actually, like Bullock was only built in 1987. St. Clair was only built in 1983. Bibb was built in 1998. So I have sources who have been in prison for longer than many of these buildings have existed, which is a big part of where the overcrowding comes from, is the sentencing laws. The overcrowding is probably the most persistent theme, which a lot of others like violence stem from. And also the deprivation is the other word there in the title of the book. So it's overcrowded and resources are scarce. So, for example, prisoners get one roll of toilet paper a week. If they run out, they don't get another one. It's actually considered destruction of state property to like cut up your shirt or use your sheets or anything else. So prisoners are flushing all kinds of things down the toilet because they run out of toilet paper, and then the plumbing systems are quickly over capacity and dysfunctional. I guess I would say overcrowding is probably the most persistent theme. And
when I read that in your book, that they have a ration of toilet paper of one roll per week, that was almost difficult to believe. I'm assuming that I can be correct in assuming that these are not the really nice, like Charmin Ultra Strong, really big rolls of toilet paper. They're presumably like the really thin one ply that you have to use just a whole lot to be able to do anything with. Do you have any idea about like specifically what kind of toilet paper they have?
That's a great question. I assume it's some sort of unpleasant industrial, very harsh, unpleasant toilet paper, but I've not actually had it in my hand or used it, thankfully.
Right.
Yeah.
Eddie, Matthew was talking about the overcrowding and how, and specifically the toilet paper and how that has led to sewage problems. Can you talk to us about what do those sewage problems look like in the prisons and how prevalent are they?
Yeah, Matthew's book does a really good job of describing, the serious nature of this issue. I mean, it's one thing to hear that, toilets get backed up, but to live in that environment where the showers and the toilets are backing up with excrement, and that's how you have to exist. I mean, the illnesses that can result from that. I mean, we're building a database of deaths at Appleseed, and in 2023, our first year that we're building this database, we see a lot of natural deaths of things that really should be preventable. Sepsis, different kinds of infections. It's hard to imagine that living in that environment is healthy for somebody.
And one of the things that really stuck out to me when I was reading the book was like every time it rains, the toilets get backed up to such an extent that they get like that the sewage comes out of the bathrooms and into like the dorm rooms and even some of the common areas. Am I remembering that right?
Yeah, that's right. And Bullock is not the only one. I've actually reported on Fountain Prison, and actually in one of those articles, I was able to get pretty extensive video documentation from inside the prison of sewage water just streaming into one of the dorms. In Bullock, on Christmas, the week of Christmas, the plumbing system was extremely backed up. Prisoners were telling each other not to use the bathroom. And, I don't want to do any spoiler alert, but basically, two of the prisoners ended up like snaking garbage bags down their arm and reaching into the toilets and trying to unclog the system with their hands, essentially, to relieve some of the pressure on the system. And they were engaged in that for hours and hours. Also, I should say the heating system also broke down in Bullock. And at the beginning of the winter, it's a standard practice for, at least in Bullock, for everyone to get an extra blanket. But pretty quickly, and from the interviews, it sounds like this is not the first time this has happened. They had to use their blankets to mop up the sewage water from the floors because they were not being provided any cleaning supplies by the prison administration.
The lots of other problems, health problems in the prison, particularly overdose deaths, violence, people being killed in the prisons. And, Alabama prisons have been like, it's kind of the conditions in the prisons have always been bad, but there have been ebbs and flows in the public consciousness about how bad this is. And in your book, you talk about in the 70s and 80s how, there was some interest in trying to make it a little bit less like a third world, prison camp. And it's going to be a little bit long, but I want to read a quote from your book in which you quote from somebody else's book and then juxtapose that to a recent report. It's a little bit long, so folks bear with me, but it's so important, I think, in contextualizing really how bad our prison system is. So you quote this fellow named Yackel, who wrote a book about the prison system in Alabama in the 80s. So at one point in Reform and Regret, that's the name of the book, Yackel notes that a particularly bad stretch in the early 1970s, this is what you're about to hear, is like, oh, they were thinking this is really, really bad, brought more attention to the problems with Alabama prisons and added urgency to the legal challenges getting underway at the time. Here's from Reform and Regret. The attention of prison authorities was diverted to even more serious difficulties within the system. The prison population had been growing for years, but now the influx of new inmates was staggering. Frustration and anger grew in geometric proportion. The result in Alabama was what it had been in Attica in New York only 2 years earlier. Through the long summer and fall of 1973, local newspapers carried scattered stories of inmate violence. Reports that inmates had been stabbed, raped, or murdered became common. By official count, a total of 27 prisoners, 27, keep that number in your head, 27 prisoners lost their lives in the Alabama penal system in the 1972 to 1973 period. Guards were also occasionally injured or killed. The rate of incidents promised to be higher still if the legislature enacted pending bills sponsored by Attorney General Baxley to increase prison sentences and thus the number of inmates dramatically. So Whalen continues and says, to compare what were considered to be particularly scandalous numbers in the early 1970s to what we are seeing now, take this report from December of 2022, 50 years after the period that Yackel was writing about. Here's from that December 2022 report. More people incarcerated in Alabama's prisons have died so far in 2022 than in any single year for decades. In the first 11 months of the year, 11 months, 222 people died in the state's prisons. The Alabama Department of Corrections had not reported the total number of deaths in 2022. Press have confirmed 222 deaths, which exceeds the toll recorded during the height of the COVID pandemic. And so now we're breaking away from that report, and he says, consider this breakdown of even more recent numbers by Bert Coulter, who's on the air with us right now. Alabama prisons saw a record 325 deaths in 2023. Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate. I mean, that's staggering. That is, I almost, I don't know what else to say about that. I don't know, Matthew or Eddie, if you have anything to say about the deaths particularly. But, I'm interested in talking a little bit about the drugs if you don't have any other comments on just the numbers.
Yeah, I can speak briefly on the numbers. I mean, that year, so we've actually learned that there are a few more through records requests. That year was actually 328. It's the latest number we have. Just to give you a sort of an idea of where that sits nationally, the overdose death rate that year was 20 times the national rate across state prisons. There were 100 overdose deaths that year alone, and of those, 58 included fentanyl, either by itself or in combination with another drug. So fentanyl itself is killing folks just about every day in an Alabama prison. So far this year, there have been 100 deaths just between January 1st and the end of June. So, 6 months in, we're at 100. 2023 was a record year of deaths. 2024, we don't have a full picture yet on what caused those deaths, but it was at 277, and so it hasn't gotten much better. We're seeing homicide rates 4.25 times the national rate in 2023, 14 homicides that year. Suicides are very high as well. It's a crisis. I mean, it's a real crisis.
And then also a fair number that the investigations have not been closed. Is that right? Yeah.
And so, Eddie, can you talk to us about the drugs? Because you said, a lot of these are coming from overdose deaths, and that might sound kind of bizarre to people who are in the free world, as the prisoners in Alabama call it, because you would think, well, they're in prison. How are they getting drugs, Eddie?
Yeah, Matthew's book does a really good job of talking about this. The folks, his sources are hearing what exactly we know to be the case is that most of the drugs that get into our prisons they're walking through the fences, with staff, officers and staff. You can get just about anything in prisons, and we've seen arrests. There have been efforts by ADOC to sort of crack down on this, but really it's just the tip of the iceberg. The amount of drugs in our prisons is astonishing. And that's just that's evident by the number of overdose deaths. I mean, we see, and this is just the deaths. This is not folks who overdose and don't die. That number must be much larger. We just don't see that recorded in the data as much. It's a big business. You can make a lot of money selling drugs in prisons. We've heard from one officer who told one of my colleagues that they put their kid through college selling drugs. So, it's a big business.
Yeah, I would also add, I was pretty surprised at how open with me the prisoners in Bullock were about how the drugs were getting in. In the past, when I've asked people that question, they're pretty afraid to answer it, understandably. But every single source I asked in Bullock said it was coming in through the guards. And also, I just want to note that I think it was 2022, Alabama Appleseed did the Bitter Pill report, which showed that overdose deaths continued even after the prisons were closed for visitation. So there's really only one way they could have been getting in. There's nobody else. You had a full time period where nobody else was going in and out of the prison except the staff.
Yeah, I mean, that it's and one of the things that you do in your book, Matthew, is you talk about how there are a lot of people in the prison system who did not enter addicted to drugs. They came in for some other thing, and through the terrible conditions in the prisons, and basically the fact that doing drugs is like one of the only ways that you can kind of find some level of mental relief, that a lot of people get addicted to it in the prisons. They're coming out of these prisons with more problems than they went in with.
Yeah, and that's sort of regardless of what problems they went in with. I think I say in there that, just kind of as a side note, it was interesting to interview. It's been interesting over the years to interview so many prisoners who are in there for violent crimes and hadn't done drugs before, and then started doing drugs in prison. and also to have interviewed so many people who were in there for nonviolent crimes and then committed a violent act after they got to prison. They're sort of examples of the system's failure at every level for every kind of prisoner.
Speaking of that, the different kinds of prisoners, Eddie, do you have like a profile of the typical person in an Alabama prison, like why they got in for, like what their economic background might be? Do you have anything like that offhand?
Yeah, this is important. I'm glad you asked that, because there is this notion, and it's been said by folks in leadership in Alabama, that our prisons are full of dangerous, violent people. Let's just clarify real quick. ADOC's own quarterly report, their last monthly report, puts that number of violent offenders in our prisons at 65%, and that's a legal definition. That doesn't mean they hurt anybody. That just means that they're classified as violent. You could go into somebody's garage, steal their lawnmower, they're not home, that's considered a violent offense. So we have a lot of folks serving in our prisons for very low level, minor property crimes, drug crimes. Some of those don't even make it out. They could we did stories, they're horrible, guys serving 1 to 2 years for minor things and get killed before they get released. The notion that our prisons are full of violent people is incorrect. I will say that nobody comes out of our prisons better. They're racked with PTSD. They've probably been assaulted once or twice or more. We're not rehabilitating people. It's a horrible situation.
And I want to, that's always been a very frustrating thing to me. That the people who support this sort of punitive correctional system do not have to own any of the violent crime that comes out of that, right? I mean, every time somebody commits a murder because they were out on the street or whatever, and if they had been previously arrested, the thing is, oh, well, they were let out and they should have never been let out. And it's like, even for violent crimes, nobody basically says that even if you actually do hurt somebody, and even if you hurt somebody badly, nobody thinks that you should be in prison for the rest of your life for most violent felonies. Like, that's just not how it works. And so they have to come out. And the fact is that these prisons are making people come out worse. Why don't folks like Governor Kay Ivey have to answer for the violent crimes that are committed by the people that come out of her prisons?
Yeah, I mean, 95% of the people in our prison serving today will get out. Only 5% are serving life without sentences. Where's the concern about safety in our communities? Because these folks that are getting out aren't receiving the kind of programs and care they need while they're in, and so we're doing them a disjustice. We're doing their communities a disjustice. This isn't safety. I mean, if you care about safety, you rehabilitate. You make these programs available, these drug programs that folks are waiting year to get in our prisons. I mean, that's, if you care about safety, put your money where your mouth is.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
also,
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. No, I was just saying quickly that. Also, as a result of the overcrowding, there's no classification system. So you have violent prisoners and nonviolent prisoners all mixed up together. Yeah, you talk about how folks who are assaulted by somebody, even sexually or otherwise, might go to the correctional officers and try to be separated from this person who assaulted them. And in some cases, like, they're just totally ignored, and they're continued to allow to be in the same dorm with this person that assaulted them. It's just, it's staggering. I really recommend folks check it out. Bullock, Chronicles of Deprivation and Despair. We're talking to the author Matthew Vernon Whalen and Eddie Burkhalter, researcher for the Alabama Appleseed Center for Law and Justice. We're coming up on the end of the segment, but I've got a couple of more questions. I had more that I wanted to ask, but we ran out of time. When I read stuff like this, and I hope, and I really do think that most people, if they were aware of what's going on in these cages for people, would be
shocked and appalled. And so when asked, I'll start with you, Matthew, how do decision makers in the ADOC, the Department of Corrections, or relevant committees in the legislature or the governor's office respond to these reports?
Well, they used to respond to my request for comment a lot more, and they have not responded to my request for comment on this book, which I don't think is personal or anything. I assume they're just busy. But actually, when I was first in touch with the ADOC, and I think I've mentioned this to Eddie in the past, I was pretty shocked by how much they confirmed. I would have some horrible allegation, and I would ask them for a request for comment. Oftentimes feeling pretty sure that they would say nothing or deny it. And they were often pretty straight up with me. And, I think that's because they support these things. So often when I was in touch with them, they were often pretty straight up with me. I mean, often they were pretty secretive about things that I thought were pretty obvious, but they have not responded to my request for comment on this book. And when they do comment publicly, they want to build more prisons, even though that solution has not worked in the past and has been court ordered against in the past. And even though they're trying to close 4 other prisons at the same time, so they say. So therefore, the reduction of overcrowding would be limited anyway. But even if they weren't doing that, history shows it wouldn't work. And so, I mean, I think the quote from Governor Ivey is responding to a DOJ report. She said, "We'll find an Alabama solution to this Alabama problem." I mean, I think we all know what that means. If history is any guide, the Alabama solution is to keep locking more people up and building more prisons and packing as many people into them as possible, as fast as possible, for as long as possible.
Eddie, is that the only thing that's being done right now to address any of these issues, is just trying to build more prisons?
But that's the major push. And we've seen some action from the Joint Legislative Prison Oversight Committee to do some things, and they've made some improvements. They're listening. Even the Republicans, even on that committee, are listening. They have been. But we'd like to see more substantive steps taken. Oversight. We need an oversight program to sort of oversee what's happening in our prisons, independent of ADOC. And that's something we're probably going to be calling for again. There just needs to be more. There's a new family services unit that was put into place to sort of address families' concerns as crises pop up. But we need more on the front end. There doesn't need to be a crisis in the first place. So
we've been talking to Eddie Burkhalter, researcher for the Alabama Appleseed Center for Law and Justice, and Matthew Vernon Whalen, journalist and author of the new book, Bullock, Chronicles of Deprivation and Despair in an American Prison. Matthew, where can folks find the book?
You can find the book on leftwingbooks.net, or it's also on Amazon now. Yeah.
All right. Thank you both for your time.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks a lot.
Caller on the line from a 256 area code. I believe this is Dwayne. I was expecting a call from him because of our interview to start the show. Hope he was able to hear that, and I am interested in your thoughts on that. Dwayne, thanks for calling in.
Well, you're welcome. I was so glad to hear that. Excellent. I've known about 80 years, and it was good to hear about the book about Bullock. Now, on my History of Horrors, that's been on there for years, and I've been on here for years talking to you guys about this. Mm-hmm. I have the actual couple of paragraphs where the federal judge has declared cruel and unusual punishment from back in 2017, particularly for the handicapped and those that were in the mental hospitals that are in scattered throughout the state in these prisons in solitary confinement for their own protection. And I really want to be clear about that. And where Eddie was saying Governor Ivey had talked about it following having her Alabama solution, that's the reason for the title of the movie. And on the site that I've got it, I have Charlotte Kaufman, one of the producers, that is actually with the LA Times interview, is speaking to KIV saying, "Let cameras see what it's like in these prisons." governor.
Mm-hmm.
And I also have one of the guards where I'm with them in front of the Department of Corrections talking about there being less than 10 guards guarding Limestone Correctional Facility at one time period a few years ago. And what that was like, no soap, no tissue like you were saying. I mean, breaking bars of soap off to divide it so they can take a shower. Persons being behind there, guys, that you can't go in, you're one guard. You've got to try to get someone from inside there to drag the body of where someone's been beat or harmed or raped, to open the door to pull them out. Have you got me? And that's consistent and still going on. So not being aware of it is part of the problem, and us not having empathy when it comes to these situations, or doing things that will stop recidivism. Couldn't be more clear about that. And as far as what you were talking about, Adam, about the monitoring your yard as you're going by with the garbage truck, years ago we faced a similar situation in Morgan County. The district commissioner of the more wealthy area there, Point Mallard, I believe it was, wanted the whole county to be gone over like you would at Point Mallard. And I was instrumental in helping to prevent that from happening. And then the other was, are you aware that Huntsville is coming across toward Lacey Springs into Morgan County in the city limits?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah,
Are you aware of that?
It's like multiple counties now, right?
Yeah.
Limestone, Morgan,
and get ready.
Madison. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, get ready for what happened back then. What I believe to be a group of in power, wanting control of the city of Huntsville coming into Morgan County, put forth a candidate to become the county commissioner for that area. In other words, they're going to pick where the water pipes go, where the sewage goes, where the money from Morgan County goes. Right. And we had the normal person that was always our person, but someone that said they lived in the county. The place looked wrecked. The place that he said that he lived had cracked windows and a not mowed yard. And I said, prove you live there. Now follow me. If he had been allowed to go into our little district when we had our little vote, he would have been voted on by the entire county at the end, where his family had a greater population and knowledge. More people knew him. Got me?
Right.
And I said, show me a water bill, show me a power bill. And, when the meeting came, it was only Dwayne that was there. And the Secretary of State said, Dwayne is correct. He must prove what Dwayne wants to know, that he really lives there. And a week before we were both going to go speak at Decatur Country Club to tell our ideas of this, he backed out of the race. So, one person, that was me, can make a difference. And I have made a difference. And I made a difference as far as getting Commissioner Ham to have someone go and see those persons that were previously bedridden to doctors ordered care in our facilities, that became homeless, that wound up in prison because of it, to be seen at least twice a month, where for years they had never been seen before, guys.
Wow.
But I appreciate you having your guests on. I'm still thinking about running. It's just going to kind of depend on how things fall. If the movie falls out about that time where I can go on the air to talk about these things, that will help me, because I don't have the funds without, like you guys saying something, or the movie coming out where I can go on television and radio and newspaper to say these are the things that we need to look at. And I also want to tell you, on Dale Jackson's show, Jacob, in his first interview after he said that he was running, he told Dale he was open to building another prison. Now, that's just completely outrageous. We are already spending over $2,200,000 plus the $50 million bond that we borrowed against, that we will be paying back for 30 years for the prison that's supposed to go where, in the district where the Porch Creek Indians are. And they're a lot of the whole reason that legislator that wants it there is getting a prison there. Right. But I know I probably spoke too long there, guys. But I appreciate y'all a lot. Appreciate the subject matter. And if I can ever be assistance to to you guys or anybody, let me know. History of Horrors on Quora. History of Horrors, the Alabama Department of Corrections. All kinds of stuff. I'm even videoing the HBO crew that are doing their videoing. Got me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So,
Okay, cool. And
so
I did want to share, Dwayne, that I think there will be some screenings happening in North Alabama of the Alabama Solution at some point later this fall. So we'll definitely be sharing those on the air, once we find out what, any details of that. But yeah. I'm really excited for it to come out.
Yeah, I would love to come to those too, guys. I really would. I think it's going to be very eye-opening to everyone.
Sounds good.
Take care. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Dwayne. Appreciate you, brother.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.